السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. تقرير صادم يرصد تورط البنتاغون في تزوير مستندات لنقل الأسلحة إلى المجموعات المسلحة في سوريا. عمليات نقل الأسلحة هائلة، ويتطلع البرنامج إلى الاستمرار لسنوات وفقا لتقرير نشرته مجلة الفورين بوليسي. مع الصحفي البريطاني مارتن جاي نتحدث عن هذا التقرير وخطورة ما كشفه وعن تداعياته اليوم حول ما يدور في سوريا والجوار من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا.
We agreed that all responsible nations must work together to confront terrorists and the Islamic extremism that inspires them. We will stop radical Islamic terrorism because we cannot allow it to tear up our nation and indeed to tear up the entire world. We must deny the terrorists safe haven, transit, funding, and any form of support for their vile and sinister ideology.
لعل التحقيق الذي استمر شهراً وتتبع وكشف عن شبكة كبيرة وعملية سرية لشحن أسلحة إلى المجموعات الإرهابية في سوريا عبر رحلات دبلوماسية منشأها القوقاز وأوروبا الشرقية وتحت إشراف وكالة الاستخبارات المركزية CIA وغيرها من وكالات الاستخبارات، قد أدى إلى استجواب وطرد الصحفية الاستقصائية البلغارية داليانا غايتنشييفا التي كانت أول من كشف الستار عن هذه المعلومات الخطيرة بحسب المتابعين لهذا الملف. لكن مؤخراً نشرت مجلة الفورين بوليسي الأمريكية تقريراً صادماً عن مجموعتين دوليتين لمراقبة الأسلحة يثبت ما كشفته داليانا. بحسب التقرير فإن البنتاغون يواصل شحن كميات قياسية من الأسلحة إلى سوريا، وتتولى وزارة الدفاع الأمريكية طمس كل مستنداتها الخاصة المتعلقة بمسار تلك الأسلحة. الجدير بالذكر أن البنتاغون خصص ما يقارب $2,200,000,000 من الأسلحة والعتاد من الحقبة السوفيتية التي تغذي وتسلح مجموعات مقاتلة في سوريا مثل القوات الديمقراطية السورية ووحدات حماية الشعب الكردي. اللافت في الأمر هو شحن تلك الأسلحة عبر تجار الأسلحة في أوروبا الشرقية ذوي صلة بالجريمة المنظمة، والمريب أن البنتاغون يزيل كل المستندات والأدلة المتعلقة بمن سيستخدم الأسلحة في نهاية المطاف. مارتن جاي الصحفي البريطاني كيف يقرأ هذه التقارير وخلاصتها؟ وهل يعتقد أن السبب الذي دفع البنتاغون إلى تغيير سجلاته هو طمس آثار العلاقة بالجريمة المنظمة؟ ولماذا تكشف اليوم الفورين بوليسي هذه المعلومات؟ ومن جانب آخر، ما مصلحة إسرائيل والغرب في إقامة دولة كردستان الكبرى؟ Martin J., award-winning British journalist based in Beirut. Welcome to Min Dakhil from the Inside, sir. Well, Martin, my first question for you is this bombshell report by the Foreign Policy. The Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project and the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network produced conclusive evidence that not only is the Pentagon currently involved in shipping up to $2.2 billion worth of weapons from a shady network of private dealers to groups like the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Kurdish People's Protection Units in Syria, but is actually manipulating paperwork such as end-user certificates, presumably in order to hide U.S. involvement. How do you read such a report?
I think it's another facet of the chaos and corruption of the Trump administration. You know, we seem to be experiencing just Trump not really on the same page as the Pentagon or any of the other state institutions. He seems to carry out policy on a day-to-day basis without any regard for anything other than generate headlines for himself. And this is, if you remember, just a few weeks ago, Trump announced that he would no longer be backing any of the Syrian rebels in Syria. We all made a big story about that. I remember writing about it myself. And hilariously, we find that just a couple of weeks after he said that, he actually personally signed off $600 million more arms sales to Syrian rebels. So there's a lot of lying going on, but there's also a lot of dysfunction between the institutions in Washington. I don't think anyone's really following Trump on this. You know, the total is something like $2.2 billion in arms, which are supposedly...
They are, I think they are just in 2017, 2018, and then up to 2022.
Exactly, yeah.
So the sum of all these is $2.2 billion.
Yeah, and it's, if you remember, it's Charlie Wilson's war. I don't know if you remember the Hollywood movie a few years ago of the senator, the American senator, who did much the same thing in Afghanistan by procuring Russian-made weapons so that the Mujahideen could fight.
Soviet weapons,
Soviet,
yes.
yeah.
Soviet-era weapons.
Soviet weapons, so that they could fight the Russians, and there would be no real link back to the Americans. It's a similar story. But it also raises a number of alarming questions as to what really is the Trump policy for the next few years in Syria. You know, I mean, he said, I mean, he went on the record and said, or rather Rex Tillerson said, that that once the fighting had died down and once the northern strip of Syria was in a calmer state, that the weapons would be given back to the Americans from the Kurds. Clearly that was a lie. Clearly that wasn't at all correct.
But the issue here, Martin, is why would the Pentagon resort into falsifying the documents or trying to wipe out any traces of this operation taking place?
Well, it may well have been about his statement. It may well be, this may well be his own people trying to cover up the fact that that statement was disingenuous. I mean, you know, Trump does so much on the hoof. Everything he does is unprepared. Everything he does is completely immediate, without any preparation, without any thought, and without any consultation of anybody else, that it's quite possible that he may well have meant what he said a few weeks ago by no longer funding rebel groups, but he wasn't very specific. He didn't say the Kurds. I mean, most journalists at the time assumed he was talking about the FSA, for example, the so-called moderate rebels in Syria, if you like. So it may well be that he's been caught out. The Pentagon didn't get the memo, obviously, because $2.2 billion topped up with $600 million until 2022. I think this may well could be another example.
They say here that the Department of Defense has budgeted $584 million specifically for the Syrian operation for the financial years 2017-2018, and has earmarked another $900 million of spending on Soviet-style munitions between now and 2022, the sum of which becomes $2.2 billion.
Yeah, and it's going into the hands of the Kurds, so I think that gives us an idea of the future ideas that America has in that part of Syria. You know, they've created an old Cold War situation, an east-west, or rather a north-south, because you've got that northern strip of Kurdish-occupied Syria now, which is going to be US-backed for quite some time to come, until 2022. But I also think it's also about corruption. I also think if you look very closely and you see who is running America today, you know, it's largely the military-industrial side of the companies. The military spending is so much more powerful and so much influential that most people like to admit. That's what's really controlling Trump. If it's not military-industrial complex, then it's Goldman Sachs. But how much of these decisions that he makes really can he stand by? You know, so I think there may well be a certain amount of corruption to this deal as well.
Marta, what is very intriguing about this report is the fact that Foreign Policy, which is the foremost establishment national security publication in the world, would admit that the Pentagon Syria weapons procurement program is tied to East European organized crime, is itself hugely significant, right?
Well, I think it's symbolic of the fact that Trump doesn't have that much support in Washington. I mean, he didn't have much in the first place.
Exactly.
But a number of these institutions have realized 6 months into his presidency that he's just doing everything on the hoof. And there are fears within the deep state, within the intelligence organizations, within the State Department, that Trump could really go out of control and do something completely crazy. And they feel that, you know, they need to take action. So it may well be that some of these individuals working for these organizations are starting to leak now more to journalists, and I think we're probably going to see more of that.
Now, the sheer volume of the weaponry continuing to ship into the Syrian battlefield and other parts of the Middle East ostensibly means inevitable proliferation among unsavory terror groups, as I'm quoting them. So what does that mean?
It means that it won't exclusively go to the Kurds. It allows the option open for other groups. If you remember, in 2013, Obama had this what I called a dirty dozen of 12 or 13 hardcore Sunni groups, which were, if not affiliated, very closely linked to Al-Qaeda groups, which he supported financially and gave arms to. You know, and you had this fiasco of many of these groups receiving anti-tank weapons. Within a few weeks later, Al-Qaeda using those weapons against the Assad regime, and everyone was asking, well, what's going on here? You know, I think this arms deal keeps that option open, and it really throws the spotlight on Idlib. I mean, there's a great move in Idlib region now from the Russians, Iranians, and Turk to neutralize the region. But in Idlib, you still have a great many Al-Qaeda groups, and you know, the million-dollar question, or the $2.2 billion question, is will these groups still be funded as well as part of that?
Now, allow me to ask you something regarding the recent developments that took place and are still taking place in the region, particularly in Syria and Iraq, also in Lebanon. Did Assad and Iran win in Syria?
It rather depends on who you ask. I think not yet. Because when you talk about
when you talk about the failure of the Western coalition in Syria, so to say.
Oh, that's a total failure. No question about that at all. And I think the failure of the West and also the Gulf Arab states in Syria is going to be the new problem. It's going to be the new tension that's being created in the region, because you know, you don't just walk away from that. You know, 6 years of war. The Assad regime, supported by Russia and Iran and Hezbollah, has more or less cleaned up. The game's over, you know, and now a process of reconstruction and reconciliation has to start. I think that's why the Russians are so speedy with pushing through a new peace process, which will start off in Idlib province to try and neutralize these groups and to stop any further tensions between the Kurdish-backed forces in the north and the rest of the country. And that's already happening. Actually, today, if you saw, there were reports on the Euphrates River of both groups squaring off amongst one another, unconfirmed reports that Russians were bombing SDF forces as well. So I think there's a real tension in the region. Assad has won. Whether he'll stick around for very long, we'll see, because Iran and Russia both have ideas about what they want to do with Syria now. You know, when superpowers invest in such a war, there's usually payback at the end of it. You know, so I think you could say that the West has lost. I don't know whether Assad has won or not, but
you know, even the Saudis, they say, well, Assad staying in power is not an issue according to us, or whatever is related to him. But you know, Iran on the ground in Syria is the issue.
Yeah, and it's an explosive issue, and it's an issue which now everybody's beginning to wake up to. You know, you have history is repeating itself. In 1981, Reagan was voted in the White House, and he ramped up the Cold War stakes and created a new tension in the Middle East, which gave the impetus and the basis for Syria for Israel, to bomb Syria. We're doing a full circle. Exactly the same thing is happening right now with Trump. You know, the Israelis are getting incredibly skittish about the situation in Syria, because all of that war now that was going on, which suited them for so long, because it took away the pressure from Hezbollah. You know, it kept everybody busy, and they could just keep a distance and actually be quite comfortable with the situation.
And rely on the fighting.
Well, that's over now.
Yeah.
You know, so they're looking now. I mean, if we thought they had this incredible relationship with the new Trump administration, which turned out to be false, because when Trump's people and the Russians sat down and ironed out a peace deal, they didn't even include the Israelis. They didn't even look at the Israel point of view, and left out some key components, like where would Iranian positions be in the new makeup. And now you've got Iranian troops now a matter of kilometers from the Golan Heights, which is making them
in the south of Syria. Yes,
it's making Israel incredibly skittish, and a new tension now has emerged, because things have got actually much worse now, and now
with the de-escalation zones also.
Well, that will happen, and when those zones have been neutralized, you know, I mean, look, Israel sent a message to Russia just a few days ago when it bombed that research center in that was nothing to do with sending a message to Assad. It was a message to the Russians saying, look,
because the Russian also missile battery was, they say that it's not so far away from
yeah, but you have to put into context. You know, they've been asking the Russians for the last few weeks, please do something about Iran in Syria, and the Russians don't want to budge on it. You know, and that's really the issue here. Is you know, could we get an arrangement with Russia so that we could diffuse the situation? The Russians haven't budged. Israel is desperate to forge a new relationship with Russia because of this, and nothing's really going their way for the moment. So they're becoming incredibly nervous, and that missile attack was really about that.
It was a message to the Russians.
Yes,
but
I
do you think that
yeah.
Putin is going to raise the yellow card in face of Israel?
No, he's playing a very clever game. You know, he has so much to capitalize on now. There's so much he can benefit from. For years, Russia dreamt of having a Mediterranean base, and the ideological marriage of Russia and Syria works so well on so many levels. Iran too also can benefit from having a Mediterranean a passage for trade and such forth. But no, I think the Russians are playing a very clever game now with Israel. So when you ask me, has Assad won the war in Syria, I don't really think we can answer that within the context of the boundaries of Syria. Because if it results in a new escalation, a new tension with Lebanon, for example, then you know, no one's the winner really.
Right. Martin J, allow us to stop now for a short break, and then afterwards we're going to talk a bit more about the Kurdish question after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود. لا تذهبوا بعيدا.
الملياردير المولود في المجر عام 1930 جورج سوروس.
جورج سوروس بالتأكيد هو جزء من ماكينة عالمية اسمها الليبرالية الجديدة.
هو وضع اللبنة الأولى ما يسمى ثورة الورد.
هذه المناطق التي عمل فيها كانت تتطابق في وقتها مع أهداف الأمن القومي الأمريكي.
هم لعبوا على هذه الحرية من أجل كسر الطوق حوالين المشروع الصهيوني المختار.
في الهوامش يأتيكم الأحد 9 مساء بتوقيت القدس الشريف.
في 7 من أيلول سبتمبر قال النائب السابق لرئيس الأركان العامة لجيش العدو الإسرائيلي اللواء يائير جولان في اجتماع نظمه معهد واشنطن لسياسة الشرق الأدنى إنه يعتقد أن إنشاء كردستان الكبرى والتي تشمل المناطق التي يسكنها الكرد في سوريا والعراق وإيران وتركيا في الشرق الأوسط فكرة جيدة يمكن أن تسهم في تحقيق الاستقرار في المنطقة. وفي سياق متصل أعلن وزير العدل الإسرائيلي خلال مؤتمر دولي لمكافحة الإرهاب في هرتزليا في 11 من الشهر الجاري أن إسرائيل تؤيد فكرة تحويل إقليم كردستان العراق إلى دولة مستقلة. مارتن جاي الصحفي البريطاني لماذا برأيه لإسرائيل والدول الغربية مصلحة كبيرة في إقامة دولة كردستان؟
Because they're obsessed with destabilizing Iran. And if you had such a thing, I mean, that Israeli has gone a little bit too far in his assessment of the situation. We're not talking about a greater Kurdistan state yet. We've got a long way to go before that happens. I mean, at the moment, it's just, as I understand it, Iraqi Kurdistan that's going to have its own referendum.
The referendum,
yeah.
yes.
But everyone knows that that will have a ripple effect. And it will have an immediate effect on the Kurds living in Iran. And the Iranians don't want that.
And the Kurds in Turkey also.
Well, the Kurds in Turkey, they are not so easily aligned politically, so that actually they may or may not gel not quite so easily. I mean, you know, I think the big issue here is that Israel will do anything it can to destabilize Arab countries in the region. Any Sunni country in the region that they can cut in half or break up into pieces strategically works for them. They've had a good relationship with the Kurds for many years. Their intelligence services work together. And I think this is a tactic which is really aimed at Iran. You know, if you can stir the Iraqi Shias and some of the militias, dare I say, that are living in Kirkuk, you know, if you can actually stir them and draw them into confrontation with the Kurds, then you've destabilized Iraq. And I think that's a tool which the Israelis are focusing on as a way of profiting geopolitically.
Right. Now, allow us to shift gears and go to the Gulf crisis. The Gulf crisis has gone back to square one. The level of trust between its different parties has dropped to its lowest levels, and the chances of reaching a political settlement in the near future are nil unless the state of Qatar was to brandish a white flag and to surrender to the emir would surrender to the king of Saudi Arabia.
Why would he do that?
Yeah, my question for you is, you said, Martin, in one of your articles that the future trajectory of the Saudi-Qatari crisis seems to be entirely in the hands of the Americans, but it's the Saudis and the GCC that which stand to be the losers of all this unless Turkey can come to the rescue. How?
Yeah, well, at the earlier point of the day, when this started, and I think I wrote that at the very beginning,
yes,
Turkey looked as though it was positioning itself to be a rather clever broker. I mean, Erdogan does this all the time. Whenever there's a crisis in the Middle East, he puts himself right in the center, reaches out to Washington. And that was the hope, that maybe a NATO member, maybe when the relations with Washington were a bit better a couple of months ago, that he might have been able to step in and cool tensions. You know, his idea, his rationale of supporting Qatar was that he didn't want to be the only Arab, in inverted commas, country in the region that supported Muslim Brotherhood. You know, so he had to stick with Qatar. But I think it's all backfiring on him as well, because the whole thing is actually becoming farcical. You know, and the longer that it goes on, the more it makes the Saudis look ridiculous, because they banged their fist on the table, they made all these demands. They're accusing the Qataris of supporting terrorist groups in Syria. What irony, what extraordinary irony. How can you keep a straight face and for the Saudis to accuse the Qataris of backing extremist groups, that's almost comical, you know. So I think unfortunately the Saudis have backed themselves into a corner, and unfortunately this is creating tension right across the region. And they don't have so many Arab countries that support them. A few GCC countries pretend and go along with it all. But you know, there are quite a few countries around the Arab world that are really quite strongly against what the Saudis are doing. Morocco, for example, it wasn't very widely reported just a few days ago that a Moroccan prince was kicked out of Tunisia simply for going to a debate at Stanford University on the subject of Yemen. That was enough for the Saudis to call the Tunisians and say, kick this guy out of your country, we don't like him. So I think the level of sensibility and self-consciousness,
sensitivity also
of the Saudis, it just reaches fever pitch for nothing. I mean, they are prone to overreacting, and this is the problem. They don't have the regional, international experience of intervention. When you look at what happened in Yemen, disaster. When you look at what's happened in Syria, the same thing, you know, and now Qatar.
But you know what's going to happen in the 39th summit of the GCC states, which is it's scheduled, I think, to take place in December. So if this rift is not resolved, the spat between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, do you think there's going to be like a royal coup, for example, to try and get somebody
No, I think that was there were a few pundits who speculated that from the beginning, that maybe the Saudis would target one of the brothers and try and destabilize the country that way. But I think if that was going to happen, it would have happened already. You know, I think perhaps we will see more of a role from the United Arab Emirates now to actually try and calm the situation. Because don't forget, the UAE has this extraordinary diplomatic relationship with Washington, and I think we'll see more of a role for them to try and diffuse the situation in Qatar.
Martin J., award-winning British journalist based in Beirut. Many thanks indeed for joining us. Thanks for your time and your insights, sir.
It was a pleasure.
Always welcome, sir. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.